the Eastern Conference as a whole. So much going on, and I think you guys hit the nail on the head. The Eastern Conference is no longer the Eastern Conference. There's definitely a lot of improvement going around. So with that in mind, I want to start off in the East with the Miami Heat, who acquired Kyle Lowry through a sign and trade with the Toronto Raptors. The deal is set for 3 years and worth $90 million, solidifying a strong Miami backcourt. This comes in addition to the re-signing of Jimmy Butler and Duncan Robinson, as well as Victor Oladipo. And on top of that, they added free agent P.J. Tucker, who, as Nick mentioned earlier, is a new NBA champion with the Milwaukee Bucks. Nick, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on Miami's offseason moves? Does this help build the kind of Heat culture that could potentially outwork a team like Brooklyn?
I'm going to start with, I love the Eastern Conference. That was outstanding. So I'm going to give you props on that one, Colin. Do I think that it's going to, I'll say it this way. I think the moves that Miami made were geared toward Brooklyn. I think that was what they were shooting for. In seeing the way that P.J. Tucker played defense against Kevin Durant in that series with Milwaukee against Brooklyn, and the type of player that he is, adding Kyle Lowry as a dude who can shoot is something that I think the Heat needed a little bit. And I like the moves. And, of course, Jimmy Butler, again, re-signing. He's a key cog. You're not doing anything without re-signing Jimmy Butler. So good on the Heat for doing that. Now, do I think that they are of the caliber of Brooklyn? At the moment, no. And they made a number of good moves. But this is not a team that has that star power. I mean, we're still talking about Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden, and a team that the health is the big if. But again, we're talking on paper right now. So on paper, they're better, and we'll see, because it's now no guarantee that the health is there. It hasn't been for the Nets. We just got done discussing that. But I don't think that these moves, as good as they are, I think it takes them up a notch. Are they in that tier with Milwaukee right now? I think so. I think they're on that level of Milwaukee. I think they certainly will compete with Philadelphia. And people forget this is a team that was just in the NBA Finals and then a down year last year. The move and the roster spot for me that fascinates about the Heat is Victor Oladipo. Because he is a guy who, in my opinion, has a lot of untapped potential, and a guy who can be a really strong piece with them alongside Jimmy Butler, alongside Bam Adebayo, alongside P.J. Tucker and the moves that they're making, Duncan Robinson as well. So I really like having Victor Oladipo in the fold there. He is, I think, a guy who can come in and score in bunches and potentially give them that other option that I really like for them to have to compete with a team like Brooklyn that's going to score and shoot the lights out. But I'm still not there quite yet on this Miami team is good enough to take down Brooklyn at full strength, which is what we have to talk about right now.
Nick, I'm glad you said that the Heat are kind of at the Bucks level now, because last season, I mean, this past year in the playoffs, we saw what the Bucks did to this Miami Heat team. So I think kind of like what I mentioned with the Knicks, how they learned from their first round playoff exit and kind of got better in the offseason. The Heat did the exact same thing here. They really were embarrassed by the Bucks. Obviously, the Bucks went on to win the NBA Finals. But what happened in that series kind of proved what the Heat needed to do in the offseason, and getting Kyle Lowry is just huge. He's definitely going to help the team shooting the ball offensively for sure. Victor Oladipo, another really nice piece. And then, of course, like you mentioned, you have to make sure you extend Jimmy Butler. That's priority number one, and they did that. Duncan Robinson as well, getting him back is a very nice piece also to really round out, I think, a really solid starting five now, and a team that I definitely see competing up there with the Milwaukee Bucks. Maybe not with the Brooklyn Nets, because, of course, on paper, like we said, a fully healthy big three is unstoppable. But I think really the Heat are trying to go about this to just get back to winning playoff series and moving further in the playoffs, like you saw them do in the bubble. So for me, the Kyle Lowry move, I'm just really happy with them and what they did there because he's going to help this team so much shooting. I mean, you saw what Lowry has meant to the Toronto Raptors and their organization, and they're already retiring his number. It's set to be for the Toronto Raptors. Just shows how important Kyle Lowry is to a franchise, and I think he's going to deliver something similar for the Miami Heat. No matter however long he's there, he's definitely a really nice piece for them, and I think the Heat really just jumped themselves right back into top of the East. Along, of course, maybe a step below Brooklyn, but right there with the Milwaukee Bucks and the Sixers and other teams as well up there in the Eastern Conference.
I would definitely agree with both of you guys. I don't think it's close talent-wise between Brooklyn and Miami. I think Brooklyn is far, far ahead. I mean, that's easy to say considering they have, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, James Harden on one team. Anytime you have those three guys together, you're going to be far ahead of your competition. I don't care who it is. But I will say this, Miami might be the toughest team in the Eastern Conference. Something about this roster to me just screams Rough Riders that are ready to get into a, low scoring 85, 77 game that's high on defense, which is very rare in today's NBA. Something that puzzles me about these moves in particular. Why would you re-sign Oladipo, who, is a scorer? When he's right, Oladipo can score with the best of them. When you already have Jimmy Butler, who needs the ball to be successful. He's not a great off-ball guy. Guys, I'm wondering, are they concerned after last year's playoff performance with Butler where he only shot 30% from the field? And not for nothing, this comes only a year after he had 22 a game in the bubble, which many people think is a myth. I'm wondering if Miami's trying to build a roster that's not necessarily the most talented, but maybe the most smart and the toughest, because Duncan Robinson, smart player, great signing, in my opinion. The things this guy does off the ball to get open and even with the ball to find his teammates in certain situations is remarkable, considering the guy was undrafted. So I'm wondering, what's your take on that? Is Miami a tough team, and does that help them at all or give them any points against teams that, are kind of scared to play physically?
Well, Colin, I want to jump in here real quick because that's a great point. I think when a team like the Heat cannot quite match up talent-wise with somebody like Brooklyn Nets, for example, then you go into finding other ways to win games. And maybe in the way that the NBA is nowadays, with lots of scoring and high-scoring games, maybe a more defensive approach, maybe a tough style of play, kind of like you talked about. Maybe that's a way that the Heat can kind of find an advantage over a team like Brooklyn Nets or even the Milwaukee Bucks. And that's really an interesting point because And then you mentioned, of course, with what happened with Jimmy Butler in the playoffs, I think the Heat are definitely aware and definitely all offseason were thinking about what happened in the playoffs last year. They definitely are using that as motivation to say, this is where we weren't good. This is where we need to get better. So whatever did happen, whatever they see, why they lost that series against the Milwaukee Bucks, and maybe it was just the Bucks were a better team at that point. The Heat recognized that and really felt they needed to get better. And that's where you see the moves like Kyle Lowry and Victor Oladipo. They're trying to do their best to score more, to be a better team offensively, try and compete. But I think if they're looking for an advantage over some of these other really talent-laden teams like the Brooklyn Nets, maybe a tougher style of play or just a different style of play to the way that Brooklyn does it will help them kind of match up in the playoffs down the road.
I think it's important to remember who's building the Miami Heat right now. Pat Riley's an old school guy. And now that's not to say that if Kevin Durant were available, he wouldn't try and sign Kevin Durant, who's not that type of defensive grinder. But I think in absence of a top flight free agent, that's exactly what Pat Riley is going to do. And Jimmy Butler's a great player. I'm going to preface this by saying that. But I don't know that he is of the same caliber of this superstar type of player that exists throughout the rest of the NBA. I mean, Jimmy Butler averaged just under 22 points a game this year. That's 26th best in the NBA. Seven assists a game, that's 10th. But just, he's not a stat stuffer. He's a hard worker, and that I think from a mentality locker room perspective is important when matched with the right people. Like Jimmy Butler is outstanding for your culture. But is he somebody who, as option number one, leads you to an NBA championship? I'm not sold on that. And I know that they were close, and I don't want to say throw out the bubble because it does count. It's a weird confluence of events. I'm just not sold that Jimmy Butler can be your number one option and lead you to an NBA championship. And he's very good. I'm not saying he's not good. And I think it's very similar to really a lot of the questions we've had about Giannis for a long time. He's a great player. He's a very good player, but where is that come postseason time, and where does that fall when he is really the guy who is your number one option? So I think Pat Riley recognizes that. I think he knows that. And if given the opportunity to pivot to a higher level of a superstar and perhaps move on from Jimmy Butler, he might consider that. Of course, that not an option right now, and I think everybody would do that. But it's interesting to me to see the way that they're building this thing, and it's similar to the way the Knicks are built a little bit. And of course, with a number of players who are just better than what the Knicks have right now. But this is a team that's trying to be a throwback a little bit. And I think Pat Riley might have been paying attention to, well, the Knicks, who came back with a lot of defense. They were able to have a lot of success last year when coached the right way. There's a lot of confidence that Eric Spoelstra will do that, will accomplish that. So maybe give it a run. Milwaukee was a team that was much better defensively as well, and we see the success that they were able to have. So I think this is a good move for Miami, just in terms of an identity shift. And I do think this is the way that you do have to build around Jimmy Butler, because if you're thinking you're going to try and build up a Golden State or that type of team, or a Brooklyn in that way, I don't think it's going to work. You need to be better defensively. This is a team that has to win the way that Toronto won in 2019 and the way Milwaukee won this year. They're not going to win like a Golden State. They're not going to win like a superstar team. That they're not that caliber. They won't win like a Brooklyn.
Certainly, I think it remains to be seen whether or not Jimmy Butler is that number one option long-term for Miami. But Nick, I have to mention something that you brought up, was that Pat Riley is an old school guy. You're 100% correct. If anyone's going to understand that work can be talent, it's going to be Pat Riley. I mean, just look at this guy's coaching history, the 80s Lakers, Showtime, who, by the way, lost to a scrappy Celtics team in 84 that was not as talented as the Showtime Lakers. Riley has gone on record saying that series really was the catalyst for those Lakers teams going forward to get more physical, to get tougher, and to really play with a more aggressive style of ball. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with Miami going forward.